Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another edition of This Week in Magic the Gathering. So the big news for this week is the Star City Games Invitational as well as their Standard Open both occurred, and we're getting a bigger look now at the new Standard as well as the new Modern. So we're going to take a little time to look at those results and some of the deck lists. We're also going to talk about the Wizards of the Coast president who has recently resigned and who's replacing him and what that means for the direction of Magic, as well as a quick question and answer at the end of the show. So having said that, let's jump into the Star City Games tournaments this weekend. So we'll start off by looking at the Columbus Invitational weekend, and first off, congratulations to Max McVitie for winning the tournament. And this is a huge tournament. A lot of the biggest stars that play in the Star City Games Open are invited. A lot of big names here, and let's jump in and see kind of what the results looked like. Let's look at Standard first. Now, we're looking at the players that finished in the top 8 of the Invitational, and here's the Standard decks that they were playing. Now, you're going to see a few things here. Mono White Humans, Bat Company in both the second and third spot. We're going to talk more about that later. Bat Company shows up again in the 5th spot. We do have Green White Tokens in the 4th, and a deck which was kind of new to this weekend, but very similar to what we saw last weekend, called Big White in 6th, and Blue Red Control showing up there in 7th, as well as White Blue Humans in 8th. Now, having said that, let's start looking at some of these deck lists. We'll start off with the Mono White Humans. Now, the first thing you'll notice is this deck is very, very similar to the Mono White Humans deck we saw in the first week at last weekend's Star City Games Open. Now, having said that, this deck did very well the first week. It didn't win the tournament, but it did very, very well. And of course, again, showing strong results. This is a very cheap aggro deck. You're going to find in it a fair amount of 1-drops that start the deck off very aggressively, and then the higher end of the curve includes things like Archangel of Tides. Always Watching also really fuels this. Big question of the week, I think, was, is the mono white version better or worse than the blue white version? I kind of like the blue white version myself because you do get access to Reflector Mage, you do get access to Dragon Lord Ojutai, which I think are very powerful cards, but there's something to be said for the simplicity and the speed of this deck, and it might just simply have more legs in the long run. So still remains to be seen. I think the jury's still out on that, but just something to keep an eye on as the weeks continue. Now let's talk a little bit about Bat Company, and this deck list here is Craig Kempel's version of Bat Company. And here's the thing. Now, this is the deck that won the previous week of the Star City Games Open, and I will say about this deck is it's a little bit complicated to play if you're not used to using Collected Company. It takes a little bit of practice at least, but it just seems like once this deck gets rolling and a player has a little bit of experience with it, it does very, very well. And we've already seen a lot of this deck show up in Standard. Now, maybe it's because it won the previous week, and we'll have to continue to watch and see how the metagame adjusts in sideboards, especially next week being the Pro Tour. I'm expecting to see some new things. But this deck so far is really showing itself to be one of the front runners, one of the Tier 1 decks. Now, the only thing I worry about is mirror matches of this can be quite grindy. Now, if you watch the coverage this past weekend, Craig was in the semifinals in a mirror match with this deck. He won 3-0 because it's best out of 5. And the actual matchup took more than 2 hours. Now, of course, this is a top 8 semifinals, so they don't have the time restrictions they do normally, and it is best out of 5 and not best out of 3. But still, playing 3 games of a mirror match taking over 2 hours. So that's could be a problem. Now, some people enjoy watching that type of thing. I do. I like the intricacies of a big complex board state. I enjoy watching that. But a lot of viewers don't necessarily enjoy watching that, especially new casual players. They get confused by large board states sometimes, and that could be something that's not desirable for WotC right now, to put out, say, next week at the Pro Tour, these matches between many Bat Company decks that are going to be very difficult to understand and very long and drawn out. So I don't think that's what they want to put forward as their product and coverage. So it's going to be kind of interesting how that unfolds next week, and we'll do a video, of course, and recap the Pro Tour for you as well. But that's still very early estimation of what we've started to see. Band Company, very powerful deck. In the long run, is it going to be good for the standard, or is it not going to be so good for standard? Remains to be seen. Let's quickly look at a couple other decks here. We have green-white tokens, which we saw last week. We didn't focus on it in last week's episode because it was a little bit further down the list, but it did perform very well again this week. So here's a quick glance at that deck list for you. And another deck which was kind of around the first week, but really evolved more the second week, is this big white deck. And it's very similar to the more aggressive versions that we've been seeing. But as you can see, this one goes a little bit bigger. It's got 4 Archangel Avacons, 4 Archangel of Tides. It's just going slightly larger, but it's doing a lot of the same things too, like Knight of the White Orchid, Threaben, Inspector, so on and so forth. Now let's look at Modern. So again, these are the same players. They saw the top 8 of the tournament. These were the Modern decks that they were playing. Let's look at a few of them. First off, we're going to look at Abzan. Now, Abzan, I think, is actually pretty interesting, and I kind of find it, I don't know, kind of funny that we now have Siege Rhino in Modern as well, and it's doing pretty good. So you have something to do with your Siege Rhinos now that they're no longer standard legal. So, but this deck, I mean, is just running a lot of powerful cards in these colors: Siege Rhino, Scavenging Ooze, Tarmogoyf, Teskers, Inquisition, Lingering Souls. I mean, these just are very strong cards. Reminds me a little bit of Jund in that way, that it's just the strongest cards in those colors, basically. Get Liliana the Val. So this is just an Abzan kind of version of Jund, I guess, in some ways, but still very powerful deck. Now, probably the big deck, at least in this tournament, was Abzan Company, and basically this is the Birthing Pod deck, but it's running Collected Company, Court of Callings instead of the Birthing Pods. But really try to do the same thing with the combos, the small creatures, and kind of ramping up to those combos. So it doesn't really look that new or different than what we've seen in the past, but it kind of has been made possible mostly due to Collected Company. We have blue-white Thopters. A lot of people call it Esper Thopters because it does run in Burial Rites. These Esper Thopter decks really are kind of catching on, but I find it interesting what Jerry Thompson said about this deck as he played it. He said it was a very, very difficult deck to run. Now, Jerry's one of the best players probably out there today, and if he's saying that he's having a hard time and lost games because of mistakes he made, that is kind of interesting when it comes to, is this a deck that I want to sleeve up and take to my Friday Night Magic or go to a Grand Prix with or whatever? Maybe not, right? So it's a very, very powerful deck, but will it catch on in the meta if it's that difficult to run? Remains to be seen, right? Now, Modern is a format that you can really invest in a deck and really devote your time and energy to it. So there probably will be players out there, kind of like Legacy Storm, for example, that will invest in this deck. This will be their deck. They're going to play with it all the time, get a lot of practice, and it could turn out to be a very powerful deck, but it might not be a deck that you see lots of numbers of at a given tournament. So kind of see where this one goes. Alright, so now let's look at the Standard Open that took place in Columbus this week, and here's where you're going to find some interesting results. Coming in first, we have Green-Red Eldrazi, okay, but number 2 was Bant Company, number 3 Bant Company, then we saw Bant Company again at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and of course more as you go down the line, so plenty of Bant Company out there. We also have a blue-red tutelage deck. We're going to take a closer look at that one because I find that one very interesting. And of course we have mono-white humans. So again, kind of a interesting result. A lot of Bant Company. We'll have to see what happens next weekend at the Pro Tour. But before we move on, I do want to look quickly at the winning deck, Joshua Dickerson's Green-Red Eldrazi. And yeah, nothing too surprising here. It's standard Eldrazi. He's really sticking to the previous block, and that's okay because obviously it did very well. And let's quickly look at the blue-red tutelage deck that Noah Walker piloted, and I love this type of deck. I like Sphinx's Tutelage. I just think that's a fun card, and this is the type of thing I would like to try out. I'm sure it's probably a little more difficult to play than other decks, but I don't know. I like this kind of thing. Runs a lot of burn. That's how it basically stays alive in the early game. Lightning Axe, for example, from the new set, as well as Fiery Temper. We still have Fiery Impulses in here, so really cool build, I think. This is just one I wanted to point out as being a little bit offbeat, a little bit fun, and still performing very well, coming in 4th. All right, so those are the deck lists to point out. I have a link in the description below if you'd like to pour over some of these results in a little more detail, so you can definitely check those out. Now let's move on to our next story. All right, so big changes this past week in Wizards of the Coast. Greg Leeds, who's been president of Wizards for about 7 years, a little over 7 years, I think, stepped down. He resigned. And he is being replaced by Christopher Cox, who you see on the right side of your screen. Greg's on the left. And he is coming to us from Microsoft. So I find this very interesting. And first off, to give you a little background, Greg's been there, obviously, a long time. And Magic has grown really exponentially since he's been in that position as president. So kudos to him for the work he's done to grow the game. Really has made the game more accessible, has really made it bigger and stronger than it really ever has been. More people playing Magic now than ever, and that is due to his leadership. That's awesome. Now, yes, we know Wizards has some stumbling points too, and some weak spots. One of their biggest weak spots recently has been probably the digital marketplace and Magic Online, which we do, I think, love and appreciate what it gives us as far as the ability to go on and draft, to test decks, so on and so forth. Definitely has its flaws. Can't be played on iOS devices, can't play it on tablets, on phones, you can't play it even on a Mac. You just have to basically play it on Windows-based systems, and just its whole setup is very outdated, and I think that's safe to say. As far as Duels of the Planeswalkers go, I think that's good for new players and bringing in new players, but established players don't really find the depth there that they find in Magic Online, so there's your problem. Now, I find it interesting that WotC has decided to go with someone from Microsoft to replace Greg as the president. And I think that says a lot for the direction that Magic is going to be going over the next few years. Obviously, someone like Greg Leeds comes in with the experience from the digital marketplace and is going to bring that experience into Wizards, as well as some probably very strong relationships from Microsoft. So watch out for that type of thing in the future. I think that's the direction that WotC really wants to go into. Now, having said that, does that mean more of a focus on digital and less on paper and less on the growth of the game? Perhaps it does. I mean, typically when you bring a new leader in at a level like this, say a level like president, that person is really coming in to establish a new direction. And obviously, look at this person's background, you'll find the direction that they want to go in. Now, I really hope that they don't completely kind of put paper Magic on the back burner, because I think they made great growths there, and they should really continue to grow that. I think ultimately that's where their bread and butter is. But at the same time, yes, they need to update Magic Online. They need to make a product that's going to be competitive in the digital market, much like Hearthstone. I know that's the go-to example, but let's face it, it's the truth. So Wizards needs to find a way to make the interface easier, make it better for more casual players, but still make it deep enough that the players who enjoy Magic Online can transition over to it. And they're going to have to find a way to somehow transition collections, transition the people that have invested heavily in Magic Online to the new format. Now, having said that, I think they've been doing a good job with taking what they have with Magic Online and trying to make the best of it. For example, if you haven't played one of the leagues, the sealed deck leagues, do it. Jump into that. That's an amazing experience because you're able to basically play a tournament at your convenience when you have time. You don't have to sit there and do 5 rounds in a row. You don't have to wait for the round to be over to start your next game. It just is a faster, more efficient way of sitting down and playing a sealed event. It's incredible. Now, it still suffers from the fact that it's in Magic Online, and all the problems with Magic Online, of course, carry over. But they're trying. That's the point. They're trying to make it better. Now, I don't know the answer. They're going to have to think of some way to make sure they don't, alienate the people who've bought into the original Magic Online, really carry them over into this new product, and make this product that's also going to be accessible to new players. It might not be easy to do, but that's the goal, and I believe that's why they brought Chris on board. So more to come on this. Obviously, we'll be watching it closer and kind of see what happens the next few years. I think it's going to be very exciting and very interesting to watch, if nothing else. And I wish them a lot of success, because obviously the game that we love and enjoy playing is hinging on it. All right, so we'll wrap things up with a quick Q&A. We only have one question this week, but in the future, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and we can put them in potentially a future episode. But today's question comes from Connor Murphy, who asks, do you think that Legacy will die off in the next couple of years despite the printing, or maybe even due to the printing, of Eternal Masters? So short answer, no, I don't think we'll die off, but I think Legacy's got a lot of obstacles, a lot of barriers that it's got to deal with. So first off, let's look at it this way. First huge barrier Legacy has, the biggest barrier obviously, is the financial investment to get involved. It's huge, and it's gotten worse since the announcement of Eternal Masters. We've reached a point now where speculation was that once Eternal Masters comes out, it's going to get people interested and excited about Legacy, and they're going to want to go out and buy the cards that aren't in Eternal Masters so they can build decks. Well, that speculation has created a huge spike in reserve list cards, especially the dual lands. And without those dual lands, let's face it, you're not going to be able to be competitive in Legacy, and shelling out hundreds, thousands of dollars even for dual lands to build just one deck. Come on. I mean, obviously most people aren't going to be able to do that, right? So that's a huge stumbling block. Now, the reserve list is kind of goes hand in hand with that, as maybe the second obstacle, just because the reserve list is going to keep generating this type of speculation, these type of price spikes. So as long as you have a reserve list, as long as you have these huge values attached to these cards, especially land bases, yeah, it's going to really prevent a lot of new people from getting into Legacy. Now, having said that, the people who are already bought into Legacy are still playing it, and I think they will continue to play it. Some regions, Legacy is stronger than other regions. If you go to the Northeast, even the Northwest, and North Central portion of the country, the United States anyway, I find that Legacy is pretty strong. New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Indiana, Seattle, like those type of areas, you find a Legacy scene. When you go south, Florida, Georgia, there's very little Legacy played in those areas, it seems. So some of it's regional. So you may live in a region where it just feels like Legacy just isn't a thing, but there are other regions where it is, I don't want to say strong, but there is a small community that is very dedicated. So that's not going to go away. It's much like Vintage. Vintage is probably a good example of where Legacy is probably already at, or at least is going to. It's going to be a small group of people, but they're going to be dedicated, and they're going to continue to play it and kind of keep it alive. Now, where Legacy could potentially do better is Magic Online, because there's no reserve list you have to worry about there. Cards can be reprinted and redistributed, and it does allow you to break in. I mean, even Vintage is accessible on Magic Online. So yeah, there'll be players playing it probably more so in digital form in the future than in paper form, unless something happens, obviously, unless there's changes made with like the reserve list and ways that they reprint cards. And who knows, obviously there's new leadership there, so maybe there'll be new directions. I guess we'll wait and see. But I think Legacy will continue to be strong in the digital world, and I think there'll be small core groups of people that play it. I don't think you're going to see a lot of new people getting into paper Legacy at this point. It does make me wonder what's going to happen with sales of Eternal Masters. Now, don't get me wrong, because of the collectability as well as the value of these cards and speculation, they will sell, and they will sell at a premium. But at the same time, I gotta kind of wonder who's playing with these cards. I mean, people that want to play sealed and draft, yes, of course this is for them, and that's why I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a really cool draft environment. but I don't really think it's for legacy players. Maybe people trying to put together Cube or Commander players, I could see gravitating towards this product, but I don't really think it's going to be for legacy players in the long run, or vintage players for that matter. I think they already have their cards and they're happy with the cards they have. They don't necessarily want new art or new borders or anything like that. I think they prefer the older cards. Now, there will be some cards that might come out in foil for the first time. That may attract some vintage and legacy players to want to pick up foils, but other than that, I think as far as the general cards themselves, I think it's more for players that want to play limited as well as Cube, Commander, things of that nature. So yeah, I guess that's the long answer. I think legacy will always be around in some form, but I think it's going to be very, very difficult for any new players to buy into paper, to be quite honest. So having said that, hey, that's the episode for this week. As always, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.